Okay, this is going to be the last video in the series I've been doing, the Bioenergetic Storm series. And the topic of this video is nutrition for thru-hikers. I first want to make it clear that this is very general advice for thru-hiking. It's not intended to be specific dietary advice for an individual. If specific advice is what's desired, then I would strongly recommend that you see a registered dietitian. What I want to do is put nutrition in a kind of a hierarchy to tell you what you're really going to need to focus on as a thru-hiker. You can see first and foremost water. It's in big font, it's in a big cell. That's going to require by far the most attention. The next most important is going to be energy or total calorie intake. The lower two cells in this diagram indicate macronutrients, which refers to specifically how much of carbohydrate, how much fat, how much protein a person needs. And then micronutrients, which is a long list of 20 plus nutrients that are all vitamins and minerals. You need all of these nutrients. They're all considered essential nutrients, essential for life and for health. The hierarchy shown here depicts how much attention you're going to have to give to each on the trail to ensure that you don't get into trouble. So let's start off with water. We don't store nearly enough water in our bodies to go for days or weeks without consuming water. So we have to consume this on a very regular basis. What happens if you don't drink it? You quickly deplete what you have in your body, and the consequences are severe.
That's the water source. It's amazing. This little trickle is life-sustaining, and it's mind-boggling. If this had dried up, you'd be really in trouble.
Let's go over the factors that determine how well hydrated you are. You can see here on the left, we have intake of water. On the right, we have losses of water. Obviously, your intake depends on fluid availability. If there's no fluid available, no water available, you don't drink it. On the losses side, exposure to high heat stress contributes to water losses in the form of sweat. If you're at high altitude, you also lose water more rapidly. And then lastly, how much you're exercising is a determinant of how much water you'll lose. The more you exercise, the more you sweat, and the greater the losses. There are a number of different things about a specific individual that determine water losses. These can be things like how sensitive a person is to thirst. When their body water starts to get low, men tend to sweat more than women, so they're a little more prone to water losses. People who are adapted to heat, ironically, tend to lose water more rapidly because they sweat more profusely. It could also be motivation to drink. Maybe you really don't like to drink the water because it doesn't taste that great. What is it during a thru-hike that can affect these factors? The first thing is desert. The Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, a lot of other trails have desert sections. Deserts, by definition, have low availability of water. When I was out, it was an especially dry year, so the few water sources there were, many were dried up by the time I got there. From a heat stress perspective, this is on the water losses side. Of course, deserts typically are hot, so you're going to lose more water in the form of sweat. I also personally had a very late start, so instead of starting early when the desert tended to be cooler, I was going into the desert when the temperatures were hitting their highest. Another factor on my specific hike was that the year I hiked, there were record temperatures, so the normally hot desert was even hotter.
It's 11 a.m. and I'm showing just shy of 110 degrees out here, and my little thermometer has been in the shade, so it's crazy.
The Pacific Crest Trail and Continental Divide Trail also have a lot of high altitude, and high altitude contributes to greater rates of water loss. And exercise volume for thru-hikers. You typically hike all day, every day, which means more hours of sweating, which means greater fluid losses. Individual factor that relates to me, I tend to be a heavy sweater, meaning that I sweat a lot, so I'll lose water more rapidly. When I was on the trail, I encountered a lot of really bad tasting water in the desert. That makes it really hard to want to drink water, so that affects the input side. And then I do happen to have a great capacity to drink a lot of water, so I can just pour a liter of water right down the hatch, but that's sort of an individual factor that allows me to consume large volumes of water very rapidly. So how much do we need? Well, I hope that that last diagram illustrates to you that the needs can be enormously variable depending on all those circumstances. A lot of hikers do use a very crude rule of thumb of 1 liter of water per hour while they're hiking. So if you're out hiking for 8 or 10 hours, you should expect to consume 8 or 10 liters of water. I would say use that very cautiously. It's a decent starting place, but then you really need to assess whether that's adequate for your particular situation. And that assessment ought to be ongoing because circumstances change. And here's a very simple tool that you can use to self-assess your hydration status while you're hiking. The first item is weight, monitoring your body weight. Well, when you're out on the trail, you don't have a scale. This isn't going to be useful to you. So we'll skip the W, go right to the U, and the U refers to urine. Check your first morning urination, your first pee in the morning. Is it a rich, kind of a deep yellow color? If it is, that would suggest you're dehydrated. You also want to check to determine how much you're peeing. If you start peeing and you're done in just 3 seconds, well, that's not a lot. The other thing that might happen is that you're not peeing nearly as frequently as you usually do. So if any of those things are happening, that's one indication that you're dehydrated. And then the third thing, or the second one you would evaluate as a hiker, is are you thirsty? If you're thirsty, that indicates you're into the early stages of dehydration, if not worse. And then as a rule of thumb, you would ask, did you have to say yes to 2 or more of these? Well, you only have 2 to work with. So if you said yes, your urine is an issue, and yes, your thirst is an issue, then it's very likely that you're in the early, if not worse, stages of dehydration, and you really need to take action. If you have one of those 2, your urine is telling you you're dehydrated, or your thirst, then you should also take action and try to keep both of those in a state that suggests adequate hydration. With respect to my hydration on the PCT, well, I did not measure my water intake, but I will tell you that I got dangerously low on water on 3 occasions.
I'm dehydrated because I just haven't had enough water. I'm absolutely flat out exhausted. Mouth is pasty, and I am absolutely thirsty. I guess lesson learned, this is probably 3rd time on this whole trip where I've ended up in pretty serious dehydration conditions.
Central to every one of these occasions was my reluctance to carry water. Water is very heavy. It's 2.2 pounds per liter, or a kilogram per liter. So if you really have to take a lot of water on a long stretch where there's no water sources, you might be carrying 8 liters of water. That's 18 pounds of water alone. So you can see why somebody might be reluctant to carry that, especially if you think there might be some water sources along the way. Well, and most of the time when I was reluctant to carry the extra water, I got away with it fine. But on 3 occasions, I got really into deep trouble. And it only takes one to go terribly bad for you to end up in the hospital or even worse. Practical tips for staying hydrated on the trail. One of them is to be sure you have the capacity to carry at least 8 liters of water. If you like using smart water bottles, take 2 or 3 of those, but you're not going to want to carry 8 of those. For that expanded capacity to carry a lot of water, take some sort of roll-up water bags. I like the platypus bags. The 2-liter bags actually carry close to 2.5 liters. So a pair of those bags gives you 5-liter capacity to carry water. If you have 2 smart water bottles, now you're up to 7. And if you have your filter bag, you can fill that with dirty water and carry it along with you. Filter it when you need the water. There's your 8 liters of water. Another thing you can do is what's very formally called hyperhydration. There are specific procedures you can go through to have your body store a lot more water than it normally would. But on the trail, you can really do this in a practical sense without going through all the rigid protocols. Basically, what you want to do is at places where you have access to plenty of water is drink a lot of water, and along with that, consume a lot of high sodium foods. The sodium will help you retain the water. Without that sodium, for the next several hours after drinking a lot of water, you're going to start to pee it all out. If water tastes bad, you're not going to drink it. And in the desert on the PCT, there are a lot of bad tasting water sources. These cisterns that are common out in the desert are just rainwater trapping devices. It's not unusual to get to a cistern and somebody tells you, oh, I just fished a dead lizard out of there. Well, if you hear that and then you get the water out of there and you filter it and you start drinking it, you are going to taste dead lizard. Even if you don't know what dead lizard tastes like, you won't be able to get that out of your head. So I really recommend bringing along some sort of flavorings to add to the water, like little iced tea packets or things like that, maybe Kool-Aid packets, things that are portable, easy to tear open, dump into your water bottle. If it tastes better, you're going to drink more of it. A comment about water caches. I met a Forest Service worker and a PCTA employee who were together in a pickup truck, and they said I was about to enter the Kelso Valley. It's the area on the PCT where they have more search and rescue missions because of dehydration than anywhere else. It was 40 miles without water sources, but there were 2 caches out there. And the way I learned about those caches was with the app Far Out. It was called Gut Hook at the time. And it was clear that these hikers are saying, okay, there's a water cache there. There's plenty of water, so it should be still good if you're going to be there a few days later. But there's a couple of things that are really dangerous about that. One is that the information you get from that app is very delayed, many days, maybe even a week or more delayed. The person who puts the post in there is probably not in cell range when they make the post, so it doesn't go live until they get to a cell signal. That might be days. Likewise, I can't get that information from the internet until I'm in cell range. So with those two things going on, it's good to think of information on Far Out, that crowdsourcing information, as being probably a week old by the time you get it on your phone. So it could have been that the water source dried up by the time I got there. The caches were used up. The second thing that goes on is that because of that delay, it's possible that the cache was perfectly intact and it wasn't going to be a problem. But then somebody out on, partying in their Jeep or whatever decided they want to play a prank on the hikers. So they drive their Jeep over all these bottles, and now there's nothing when I get there. Well, my life in that scenario was depending on getting water. And now I have a hard decision. Am I going to try to survive and continue for 40 miles, half of which or more than half of which I wouldn't have water for? Or do I call a search and rescue right away? It's a bad situation, and you don't want to get in that. So if at all possible, don't rely on water caches. Clothing is another thing, and most hikers are aware of this. Loose, light-colored clothing to cover your skin. Skin absorbs heat pretty effectively. You can use clothes that reflect a lot of that. A nice hat with a wide rim is also good. Personally, I really liked using an umbrella. The main complaint I heard from people who didn't like using umbrellas is that it's too much to fuss with. Before you even go out to the trail, spend some time trying to figure out how you can attach that umbrella to your shoulder strap so you can have hands-free use of it. And it's, I would say, far more effective than a hat. It doesn't make your head hot like a hat does, and it gives a broader canopy of shade. So it's not just shading your head, it's also shading a lot of your body. Another thing to think about is when you hike. I like to hike early and late, and during the hottest part of the day, usually from about 1 to 4 o'clock, I would find a bridge or a tree to get under and just take a siesta and wait it out. The other nice thing about that, I was hiking generally before dawn and after dusk as part of that. And I think that's honestly the most beautiful part of the hiking day, is when the sun is coming up in the morning and when it's going down in the evening. I did meet quite a few hikers in the desert who had entirely flipped their schedule on its head. They decided, I'm going to hike at night and just sleep during the day. And they did well with that, I will say. I don't know how. I could never do that. A lot of people when they think of water and hydration, they also think of electrolytes. First of all, most of the water losses are in the form of sweat. And the single biggest electrolyte you lose in your sweat is sodium. Thru-hikers have an enormous sodium intake with their diet. So we're already consuming a lot of the main electrolyte that we lose in the form of sweat. But it might help with other things. First of all, one I used it for was a good water flavoring. The one I seemed to gravitate toward the most was Noon. They had a really nice taste, kind of a tangy taste, and it was even a little effervescent. The things like iced tea and Kool-Aid, I got sick of those really fast because they're way too sweet. The other thing about the Noon tablets, and I think it's probably typical of other electrolyte supplements, is the sodium is commonly in the form of sodium bicarbonate. And sodium bicarbonate is just another name for baking soda. Baking soda, for centuries probably, has been used as a thing to settle an upset stomach. And if you've been out on long hikes before, you know that sometimes your stomach isn't always cooperative. So anything that helps your stomach feel better is a good thing. It just feels better. But B, if your stomach feels good, you're going to be more likely to drink more fluids and eat more foods, both of which you really need to do. And now we're going to move on to energy, or calories. As I made very clear in previous videos, there's risks associated with not getting enough calories on the trail. Low energy availability and physiologic changes that go along with that, possibly even the medical syndrome known as REDS that I've covered in earlier videos. Just as a recap, I want to remind you that I was eating about 4,100 calories per day. This is a lot of calories, no way around it, but it wasn't enough. So what is the best thru-hiking food? Keeping in mind that calories are the major goal. First of all, whatever you'll eat. And it's got to be something that you can eat when you're tired, something you eat when you're not hungry, And be aware that this food that you really like today may not be the same tomorrow. It has to be food that's calorie dense. That means a lot of calories and relatively lightweight or small volume. A good goal to shoot for is about 100 to 150 calories per ounce. It's got to also be something that you can get on the trail. And then because you're out backpacking, it should be non-perishable. Another thing you can do to bolster your calorie intake is carry food additives, I like to think of them. Essentially fats that you can add to pretty much any foods you're going to eat along the way. And adding them to each meal you eat is a really good idea and a great way to increase calorie density. Some tips related to getting food while you're in town. I would say first and foremost, think of food as your top priority. So as soon as you get to town, go find some food, whether it be getting ready to eat food out of a store and eating it immediately or going to a restaurant. And once you're done with that, then you can do a few chores. Then a few hours later, go back to the store, maybe do your resupply shopping, but make sure you get some stuff you can eat right away again. And in a nutshell, just be sure you're eating frequently and as much as you can while you're in town. Another thing is when you're in town, this is really your only chance to eat what I would call healthy food. Big bag of salad, take the fork end of this fork, jab it into the bag of salad, sweep it through a tub of tzatziki sauce, and put it in a pie hole. And it's a great way to get some nice leafy green vegetables and that sort of thing that you can't otherwise eat on the trail. But at the same time, as you're focusing on eating healthy, be sure that you're eating a lot of foods that are rich in calories. Don't skip out on that. There's a great time to get your calories, so don't do that. Maybe you get the salad and the blueberries and so on at lunchtime and go for a pizza and breadsticks and that sort of thing for dinner. Okay, the last two things I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but macronutrients, carbs, fats, and protein. You really don't need to give much attention to these, but there are a few little caveats to that. First of all, fat. Fat is the highest thing you can get in terms of calories, so it's good to shoot for getting a lot of fat in the diet. Secondly, from a perspective of carbohydrates, a lot of people really like foods that contain a lot of carbohydrates, so don't avoid them on the trail if this is what you really like to eat. And from a health perspective, there is some evidence that if you're low on energy, like at high risk for REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, and you also have a low carbohydrate intake, you might be at actually greater risk of developing REDS, the medically relevant symptoms of REDS. So too low carbohydrate can aggravate low energy intake. So from a health perspective, it is important to be sure you're getting a decent amount of carbs in the diet. Is that typically a problem? Absolutely not. But I did meet 2 hikers that were primarily sustaining themselves on sausage. And if all you're eating is sausage on the trail, you're probably not getting enough carbs. Likewise for protein, you don't really need to worry about this. You're eating so much food, and almost every food is going to have some protein in it. Not a rich protein source, but because you're eating a lot, you'll end up getting enough protein. I ended up eating about 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight per day. The recommendation is to get at least 0.8, so I was way above what's needed, and that was fine. That was without giving any attention to it. You do have to be careful about becoming obsessed with protein. You can often lose focus on other foods, displacing other calories from the diet, and potentially running into a low energy availability situation. The other situation to be concerned about with protein is if I mentioned the sausage-only hikers. Well, there are other hikers who sustain themselves on things like Pop-Tarts and Rice Krispie treats and foods like that and nothing else. And if that's the case, there's some chance that you're going to end up protein deficient. So with the exception of those extremes, sort of the sausage diet or the Pop-Tart only diet, you're really not going to have to worry about macronutrients for the most part. And micronutrients, even less concerning. First of all, you store quite a few micronutrients in your body. You could stop eating micronutrients today and go for many days, maybe even weeks without problems. And the other thing is that just about any food you're going to be eating has micronutrients in it, even foods that we don't think of as being nutrient rich. And if you're eating a lot of foods, that means you'll get enough. I quantified all the micronutrient intakes I had. I met the recommendations and grossly exceeded the recommendations in almost all cases. The only 2 nutrients that I was low on was vitamin B12. I did take a B12 supplement on the trail, a once-a-week supplement, so that eliminated the concern about not having the dietary intake of B12. And then the other one was vitamin D. But vitamin D, most of the vitamin D we get in our body is made in the skin when we're exposed to the sun. And so being out on the trail all day, every day, results in plenty of vitamin D production. So just a recap on nutrition. I hope it's clear to you that the top priority for through hiking is to pay attention to your water and your energy intake. Macronutrients like protein, fat, and carbohydrate don't require much of your attention while you're on the hike, and likewise vitamins and minerals don't require much of your attention. So really focus on the water, and a close runner-up to that is energy intake. In the broader sense, I hope you enjoyed this series. It's been fun doing it, and I hope it's been informative to you and can help you on your through hike. And with that, I thank you for your attention.